Not all journeys begin with thunder. Some start in quiet moments beneath starry skies, where forgotten paths wait to be discovered. If you enjoy gentle quests and soft magic, like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Lydia believed that every story could be told in tea leaves, but the truest tales were written in steam. Her shop, the Whistling Leaf, was tucked into a crooked cobblestone alley that time seemed to have forgotten. It was a place you found not by looking, but by following a scent, a whisper of bergamot, a rumor of roasted chicory, a promise of something warm and true. Inside, the world was a cozy jumble of amber light and shadow. Shelves climbed the walls, heavy with glass jars of herbs, spices, and dried flowers, their handwritten labels a form of quiet poetry: midnight jasmine, sun-kissed rooibos, whispering woods pine. The air was thick with the trinity of her craft, the earthy aroma of raw ingredients, the clean, wet smell of brewing tea, and the faint, sweet perfume of magic. At 21, Lydia moved with the practiced grace of someone much older. Her magic wasn't flashy or loud. It was a quiet, intimate conversation with the world. It lived in the ancient, copper kettle that was her familiar, its surface dented and burnished by generations of use. The magic spoke through the kettle's song, a language Lydia understood fluently. A low, gentle hum for calming blends, a sharp, insistent whistle for teas of courage, a sighing hiss for infusions meant to soothe a troubled heart. And the steam was her ink. This afternoon, the kettle was singing a staccato rhythm, a march for a weary soldier. Mr. Gable, a novelist whose protagonist had been stuck at a crossroads for 3 chapters, sat hunched over a small wooden table. His face was a mask of frustration, his fingers drumming a frantic, silent beat against an empty notebook. "The usual, Lydia?" he asked, his voice gravelly with despair. "I think we need something a little stronger today, Arthur," she replied, her smile gentle. Her fingers, stained faintly green at the tips from handling fresh mint, danced over her jars. She selected a gnarled black tea from a region known for its thunderstorms, added a pinch of ginger for fire, and a single, dried crimson chili that looked like a dragon's tooth. "Dragon's breath oolong," she murmured, more to the leaves than to him. She measured the water with practiced precision, her movements a slow, deliberate ritual. The kettle was placed on the old gas stove, and Lydia leaned in, listening. The initial hum was low, a rumbling in the deep. As the heat grew, the pitch climbed, the hum turning into a vibrant, powerful song. It was a sound of gathering strength, of power coalescing. Just before it reached a full-throated shriek, she lifted it. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. She poured the steaming water over the leaves in a heavy ceramic pot. The initial hiss was sharp, explosive. As she brought the pot to Mr. Gable's table, the steam began to rise, not in a vague, formless cloud, but with intention. It coiled and thickened, twisting upon itself. Shades of gray and white swirled, forming scales, a sinuous neck, a horned head with jaws that opened in a silent, vaporous roar. A magnificent, ephemeral dragon unfurled in the space between them, its wings beating once, twice, stirring the air with a phantom current. It held its form for a breathtaking moment, a creature of myth and legend born of water and heat, before dissolving into the warm air of the shop. Mr. Gable stared, his eyes wide. The tension in his shoulders had vanished. A slow smile spread across his face, and he reached for his pen, his hand no longer hesitant but charged with purpose. Lydia didn't need thanks. The sight of his pen scratching furiously across the page was payment enough. Her magic was a balm for the everyday anxieties of the soul, the artist's block, the lover's quarrel, the quiet loneliness of a Sunday afternoon. She brewed sparrows for peace, their steamy forms flitting about the cup in a silent chorus of tranquility. She conjured sturdy oaks for those who needed to feel grounded, their vaporous branches spreading a canopy of strength. Lydia was not just a purveyor of tea, she was a curator of feelings, a gentle guardian of the city's secret heartaches. It was on a dreary, rain-slick Tuesday that Alara first found her way to the Whistling Leaf. She didn't so much enter the shop as she was pushed inside by a gust of wind that seemed determined to rescue her from the oppressive gray of the street. She stood just inside the door, dripping onto the welcome mat, a small, frightened bird buffeted by a storm Lydia couldn't see. Alara was a universe of anxiety contained in a single, slender frame. A university student, drowning in the Mariana Trench of academia, she was all sharp angles and nervous energy. Her backpack seemed to weigh more than she did, filled with textbooks on astrophysics and cosmology, books about the infinite expanse that, instead of inspiring wonder, only seemed to mirror the terrifying void of her own future. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, darted around the shop, taking in the cluttered shelves, the gentle light, the quiet novelist scribbling in the corner. She looked like she was poised to flee at the slightest sudden movement. "Can I help you?" Lydia's voice was soft, careful not to startle her. Alara flinched. I don't know. I just smelled something." She clutched the strap of her backpack, her knuckles white. "Something warm." Lydia's empathy was a finely tuned instrument, and it resonated now with the frantic, discordant frequency of the girl's fear. It wasn't the fear of a looming deadline, not entirely. It was something deeper, more primal. The fear of falling. The fear of failure. The fear of the vast, silent emptiness she studied in her books. Lydia didn't ask what was wrong. The steam would tell her what it needed to be. She chose the simplest, kindest blend in her arsenal. A pinch of spearmint, a few chamomile flowers, a single lavender bud. A tea for quiet moments. She didn't use the grand copper kettle, but a small, white porcelain one that whistled a soft, airy tune, like a bird's call. She set the cup before Alara. It was a pale green celadon, smooth and cool to the touch. The steam rose in a gentle, unassuming plume. As Alara hesitantly wrapped her cold hands around the cup, the vapor began to shift. It thinned and separated, forming a small flock of sparrows. They were no bigger than her thumb, perfectly rendered in shades of white. They fluttered above the rim of the cup, dipping and soaring in a silent, joyful dance. They didn't make a sound, but Alara could almost hear their cheerful chirps, a stark contrast to the frantic drumming of her own heart. She watched, mesmerized, until the last little bird dissolved. She took a sip of the tea. It tasted of mint and flowers and a profound, surprising calm. It didn't solve anything, didn't erase the mountain of work waiting for her, but for a single, blissful minute, it silenced the screaming chorus of anxieties in her head. The frantic thoughts quieted. The world simplified to the warmth of the cup in her hands and the lingering scent of lavender. She finished the tea in silence, paid with trembling fingers, and left without another word. But as she stepped back out into the rain, she looked back at the warm, glowing window of the Whistling Leaf. It was an island of light in a gray and drowning world. A seed of curiosity had been planted in the barren soil of her fear. She didn't know it yet, but she would be back. She had to be. The quiet moment of peace Alara found in the Whistling Leaf was as fleeting as the steamed sparrows themselves. Back in her small, sterile dorm room, the world rushed in again, a tidal wave of pressure and expectation. Her desk was a fortress built of books whose titles mocked her with their cosmic grandeur: An Introduction to Galactic Kinematics, The Fabric of Space-Time, Stellar Evolution, and Nucleosynthesis. They were gateways to the universe, but for Alara, they were just monuments to her own inadequacy. Her fear was a living thing, a parasite that fed on her ambition. It had started as a quiet hum in the back of her mind, the standard anxiety of a student in a demanding field. But it had grown, metastasizing with every difficult equation and every less-than-perfect grade. Now, it was a constant, suffocating presence. It wasn't just a fear of her upcoming final presentation, a terrifying ordeal that would determine her grade, her scholarship, her entire academic trajectory. It was a deeper, more existential dread. She studied the infinite, and in its vast, cold, uncaring expanse, she saw only her own insignificance. She was terrified of falling, of tumbling through that starless void she saw in her nightmares, with nothing to hold on to. Her nights were the worst. Sleep offered no escape, only a different stage for her terror. She would dream she was standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Below her was not darkness, but a horrifying, featureless emptiness, an absolute nothingness that promised not death, but erasure. She would fall, endlessly, her own silent scream the only sound in the void. She'd wake up with her heart hammering against her ribs, the sheets tangled around her legs, the echo of that silent scream still trapped in her throat. Driven by the memory of that one quiet moment, she found herself returning to the whistling leaf. It became her sanctuary, the only place where the parasite of fear loosened its grip. She never explained her turmoil, and Lydia never asked. The conversation happened through the medium of tea. On her second visit, Lydia brewed her a sunbeam lemon blend. The steam gathered into a perfect, miniature sun, radiating a gentle, vaporous warmth that seemed to sink right into Alara's skin. For an hour, she felt a flicker of optimism, a belief that things might, just might, be okay. The feeling faded by the time she reached her dorm, but the memory of it sustained her through another night of study. Another day, Lydia prepared a forest whisper tea, a dark, earthy brew of pine needles and dried mushrooms. The steam rose and branched out, creating the intricate, overlapping canopy of a dense forest. Alara breathed it in and felt a sense of being rooted, of standing on solid ground. It was a temporary antidote to her dreams of falling. Lydia watched her, week after week. She saw the dark circles under Alara's eyes deepen, the tremor in her hands become more pronounced. The gentle, comforting teas were helping, but they were like placing a small bandage on a gaping wound. They offered respite, not a cure. The girl's fear was a deep, cold well, and Lydia's simple magic was only skimming the surface. The upcoming presentation was a storm on Alara's horizon, and Lydia knew that if the girl were to weather it, she would need more than a cup of calm. She would need a cup of wonder. A sense of responsibility settled over Lydia. This was no longer about brewing a pleasant beverage. It was a test of her gift. Her magic had always been intuitive, gentle. Now, it was asking her to be bold. She closed the shop early one evening, the sorry, we're closed sign casting a long shadow in the twilight. The air inside, usually so full of life and scent, felt still and expectant. She pulled out her oldest books, leather-bound tomes inherited from her grandmother, their pages brittle and smelling of dust and forgotten magic. She wasn't just looking for a recipe, she was looking for an answer. She bypassed the chapters on courage-infusing tisanes and peace-inducing potions. She needed something else. Something that didn't fight fear, but dwarfed it. Something that replaced terror with awe. Her fingers traced lines of spidery script, descriptions of herbs that could make one dream of flying or see the music between the spheres. Then she found it. A small, unassuming entry in a chapter on celestial botanicals. It was a single paragraph about a flower called Etheria comimelin, or, in the common tongue, starlight chamomile. The book said it was a rare, night-blooming flower that only grew in high, lonely places, on soil rich with meteoric iron. Its pale, almost translucent petals were said to capture moonlight, storing it as a faint, phosphorescent glow. According to the text, a tea brewed from its petals didn't just calm the nerves, it cleared the soul's aperture, allowing the drinker to perceive the vastness of the universe not as an empty void, but as a tapestry of silent, beautiful light. It was said to bring dreams that offered perspective, dreams of soaring through the arms of a galaxy. It was perfect. It was also impossible. Starlight chamomile wasn't something you could order from a supplier. The book mentioned only one place it was cultivated, the mythical gardens, tended by a reclusive herbalist known only as Thea. Lydia knew of Thea. She was a local legend, a woman who lived in a secluded cottage deep in the hills outside of town, a place most people avoided. They said she spoke to plants, and could predict the weather by the taste of the wind. The next day, Lydia left a note on the shop door and began her journey. The bus took her to the edge of town, and from there, she walked. The paved road gave way to a dirt track, which in turn narrowed into a faint path that wound its way up into the mist-shrouded hills. The air grew cooler, cleaner, smelling of damp earth and pine. After 2 hours of walking, she found it, a small cottage nestled in a hollow, a plume of wood smoke rising from its chimney. The garden around it was a chaotic masterpiece, a riot of strange and beautiful plants that glowed with a faint, otherworldly light. An old woman with eyes the color of moss and hair like spun silver was tending a patch of shimmering, bell-shaped flowers. It was Thea. "You're the Kettle singer," Thea said without looking up. Her voice was like the rustle of dry leaves. "I smelled your purpose on the wind this morning. I need starlight chamomile," Lydia said, her voice sounding small in the vast silence of the hills. Thea finally straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at Lydia, her gaze sharp and discerning, as if she were peering directly into Lydia's soul. "The starlight brew is not for calming a simple fright. It is for one who is lost in the darkness between stars. The one you seek to help, her fear is very deep." "It is," Lydia admitted. "I'm afraid my own magic isn't enough." Thea gave a dry, crackling laugh. "Magic is never enough, child. It is a current, not a reservoir. You are a conduit, not a source. The starlight chamomile will not be your magic. It will be its own. Are you prepared to channel something you do not fully control?" Lydia thought of Alara's haunted eyes, of the silent, falling scream in her nightmares. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I am." Thea nodded slowly. She led Lydia to a secluded corner of the garden, where a patch of small, unassuming plants grew in the shade of a large, dark rock that hummed with a faint energy. The flowers were closed tight, but even in the daylight, their petals had a pearlescent, ethereal quality. Thea carefully harvested a handful of the blossoms, placing them in a small, silk-lined wooden box. "Brew it under a new moon or in the deepest hour of the night," Thea instructed, handing the box to Lydia. "Use water that has known silence. And do not be afraid of the sky it opens. Some find it beautiful. Others are driven mad by the scale of it." Lydia took the box. It was warm to the touch. Holding it, she felt a thrum of ancient, cosmic power, a magic far older and vaster than her own. She was no longer just a tea maker. She was the keeper of a cup of stars, and she could only pray it would be enough to light Alara's way. The night before Alara's presentation arrived like a verdict. It was a cold, clear evening, the sky a deep, unforgiving indigo pricked with stars that seemed to mock her with their silent, cosmic indifference. The weight of the impending ordeal had finally crushed her. She had spent the day staring at her notes, the words blurring into meaningless symbols, her own carefully constructed arguments sounding like the babbling of a fool. The parasite of fear had consumed everything, leaving her hollowed out, a fragile shell on the verge of shattering. She couldn't stay in her room. The four walls were a cage, the silence amplifying the frantic monologue in her head. Pulled by an instinct she didn't understand, her feet carried her through the darkened streets, down the crooked alley, to the one place that had offered her any semblance of peace. When she pushed open the door to the whistling leaf, the little bell above it chimed a soft, mournful note. Lydia was alone, wiping down the counter, the movements slow and meditative. She looked up, and the professional warmth in her eyes was instantly replaced by a deep, immediate concern. Alara looked ravaged. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to pull all the light in the room toward it. She stood there, trembling, unable to speak. The carefully constructed dam of her composure finally broke. "I can't do it," she whispered, the words ragged, torn from her throat. "The presentation. I can't. When I think of standing up there, of all of them looking at me, I can't breathe." Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her chest. "It's not just them. It's everything. The universe. It's so big, and I'm so small. I'm going to fall. I'm going to fail and just fall forever." The confession hung in the quiet, fragrant air of the shop. Lydia didn't offer platitudes or comforting lies. She simply dried her hands, her expression one of solemn purpose. She had been waiting for this. "I have something for you," she said, her voice calm and steady, an anchor in Alara's storm. "Something special." This was the moment. The ritual began. Lydia didn't move to her usual array of teas. Instead, she went to a locked cabinet beneath the counter and brought out a kettle Alara had never seen before. It wasn't the cheerful copper one or the gentle porcelain one. This was made of a dark, heavy silver, almost black, with a patina that seemed to have absorbed 1,000 nights. It looked ancient, celestial. From another shelf, she retrieved a single, perfect cup, its glaze a deep, starless blue, so dark it seemed to drink the light. She moved to the back of the shop, to a large stone basin that held still water drawn from a deep well hours before. Water that had known silence, as Thea had instructed. She filled the silver kettle. Then, she brought out the small, silk-lined box. She opened it. Alara, watching from her table, leaned forward. The flowers within seemed to hold a light of their own, a faint, milky phosphorescence. They were the palest white, their petals as thin and delicate as moth wings, yet they felt imbued with an impossible weight, a tangible gravity. Lydia took a small, precise pinch of the starlight chamomile blossoms and let them fall into the water. They floated on the surface for a moment, shimmering, before sinking slowly to the bottom. She placed the kettle on the stove. This time, there was no cheerful hum, no expectant whistle. As the water heated, a new sound filled the shop. It was a low, resonant thrum, a single, sustained note that vibrated not in the ears, but deep in the bones. It was the sound of a tuning fork struck against the fabric of space, the sound of a distant pulsar, the music of the spheres. When she poured the water into a dark, unadorned glass teapot, the hiss of the steam was different, too. It wasn't the sharp hiss of evaporation, but a soft, sibilant whisper, like the solar wind streaming past a forgotten moon. The sound of secrets being told. Lydia brought the teapot and the deep blue cup to Alara's table. She poured the tea. The liquid was clear, but it seemed to shimmer with an inner light, as if it held a suspension of crushed stars. And the steam was unlike anything Alara had ever seen. It rose not as a cloud, but as a ribbon of smoke from a snuffed candle, dark and yet luminous. It carried within it tiny, glittering motes of light, like dust caught in a sunbeam, only the sun was 1 billion years away. It did not smell of chamomile or flowers, but of cool night air, of ozone after a lightning strike, of the clean, metallic scent of deep space. Alara watched, her fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound and overwhelming curiosity. The ribbon of steam did not dissipate. It rose, uncoiling like a living thing, spreading across the low ceiling of the shop. The glittering motes began to drift, to coalesce, arranging themselves into familiar patterns against the dark canvas of the wooden beams. There, above her, was the curve of Ursa Major's handle, the distinct belt of Orion the Hunter, the proud W of Cassiopeia. The entire ceiling of the Whistling Leaf was transforming into a celestial map, a slowly rotating planetarium made of starlight and magic and steam. It was silent, breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly real. The small, cozy shop had become a pocket observatory, a window into the heart of the cosmos. Her terror, which had been a raging inferno moments before, now seemed like a tiny, flickering candle in the face of this silent, majestic spectacle. The vastness was no longer a void. It was a presence. It was beautiful. With a hand that was now perfectly steady, Elara lifted the cup. She took a sip. The taste was indescribable. It was like drinking cool, liquid starlight. It was clean, pure, with a hint of something ancient and metallic, the taste of iron forged in the heart of a dying star. A gentle warmth spread through her limbs, but it was not a sleepy warmth. It was a feeling of awakening, of clarity. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but it changed its nature. It was no longer a monster whispering in her ear. It was just a fact, a small, cold stone in her pocket, dwarfed by the magnificent, wheeling galaxy that now filled her vision. She sat there for a long time, sipping the starlight tea, her head tilted back, watching the universe turn slowly, silently above her. When Elara finally left the whistling leaf, the world outside had changed. The streetlights seemed softer, the indigo of the night sky less menacing. The shop's magic did not abandon her at the door. A single, shimmering strand of the steam nebula, no bigger than a piece of thread, detached itself from the ceiling and followed her, a silent, glittering companion on her walk home. Back in the sterile confines of her dorm room, the strand of steam drifted from her shoulder and rose toward the ceiling. It uncoiled slowly, gracefully, and once again, the magnificent celestial display bloomed above her, a personal, portable universe. The constellations spread out over the dull white plaster, casting a soft, phosphorescent glow, a gentle, cosmic night light. The plough, Lyra, Cygnus the swan, they were all there, a silent, watchful audience. Elara slipped into bed, her body tired but her mind preternaturally calm. The suffocating weight was gone, replaced by a quiet, waiting stillness. As her eyes closed, she wasn't falling into the dreaded, dreamless void. She was drifting into a sky full of promises. Her dream began not with the familiar lurch of falling, but with the sensation of weightlessness. She was floating in the center of an immense, beautiful darkness, surrounded not by emptiness, but by the very stars that had watched over her from her ceiling. They were no longer distant, cold specks of light, but vast, shimmering spheres of fire and gas, close enough to touch. Nebulae bloomed around her in impossible colors, clouds of cosmic dust glowing magenta, turquoise, and gold. She felt an instinctual push, a flex of muscles she didn't know she possessed. And she moved. She was flying. There was no sound, only the sensation of effortless movement. It wasn't the frantic flapping of a frightened bird, but the slow, powerful beat of unseen wings, like those of a great owl gliding through a forest of stars. She soared past the brilliant jewels of the Pleiades, banked around the fiery heart of the Orion Nebula, and raced a comet whose tail painted a streak of crystal ice across the black. The vastness that had so terrified her was no longer a void to be feared, but a space to be explored. It wasn't empty, it was full of wonder, of beauty, of infinite possibility. The scale of it didn't diminish her, it elevated her. She was a part of it. A tiny, thinking, feeling speck of stardust, yes, but a speck that could fly, a speck that could witness the silent, glorious dance of creation. The dream recalibrated her soul, transforming her deepest fear not into courage, but into awe. She woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through her window. The steam constellation was gone. But the feeling, the memory of flight, the sense of profound perspective, remained. It was a quiet hum of confidence deep within her chest. Her presentation was in 3 hours. The thought still produced a flicker of nervousness, a small, familiar flutter in her stomach, but it no longer had the power to paralyze her. It was just a small star, one of many in the vast galaxy of her own potential. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, her professors, her peers, she did not see a panel of judges. She took a deep, steadying breath, and for a fleeting second, she remembered the feeling of soaring past a spiral galaxy, the silent wing beats carrying her through the cosmic dark. She began to speak. Her voice, usually so hesitant, was clear and strong. She didn't just recite the facts and figures she had memorized. She spoke of the stars not as abstract data points, but as places of wonder. She conveyed the majestic scale of the universe with a passion born from having flown through it. She didn't just give a presentation, she took her audience on a journey. When she finished, a moment of stunned silence was followed by a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause. A few days later, Elara returned to the Whistling Leaf. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, mundane stars. She was transformed. The frantic, haunted energy was gone, replaced by a calm self-assurance. She moved with an easy grace, the weight of the universe no longer on her shoulders. Lydia saw the change the moment she walked in. She saw it in the clear, steady gaze of her eyes, and the gentle curve of her smile. "Hello, Lydia," Elara said, her voice warm and full of light. "Hello, Elara," Lydia replied, a knowing smile playing on her own lips. Elara didn't order the starlight chamomile. She didn't need it anymore. "Just a simple green tea today, please." As she sipped the clean, bright tea, she talked. She didn't mention the magical steam or the dream of flight. She didn't have to. She spoke of her success, but more importantly, she spoke of the future. She was applying for an internship at a mountaintop observatory in Chile. She was planning a backpacking trip. She was no longer afraid of the vast, open spaces, in the sky or in her own life. She was ready to explore them. Lydia listened, polishing a clean cup until it shone. Her work was done. The ancient silver kettle sat silent on its shelf, its purpose served. On the stove, her everyday copper kettle, heating water for the next customer, let out a soft, contented sigh. As Elara left the shop, stepping out into the bright afternoon, a real sparrow landed on the painted green windowsill. It looked in for a moment, chirped a single, clear note, and then launched itself into the air, soaring high into the wide, blue, endless sky.